Hello, welcome back, folks. This is Dr. Oscar Hernandez, board-certified internist and pediatrician. You've been following probably some of our postings that have to do with coronavirus, and usually the things I like to talk about are lifestyle issues, nutrition, exercise, activity, bring you up to date on the most latest medical developments and journal articles and stuff like that. We've taken a pause from that because what everybody really is interested in is in coronavirus, and we've done a couple of postings about that. That's probably your mother. Today we're going to go through an exercise and see what somebody would go through if they had to have self-isolation. More and more people are self-isolating as more of this virus is found, and the people that we ask to self-isolate are folks who really don't have severe symptoms. Those people are generally in the hospital. But for many people, we're sending them home. Well, how do we go home to our family, to our children, to our pets, and not contaminate them with coronavirus? We're going to go through some of the steps today, and we're going to have an improvised case of coronavirus. It's not really a real patient. It's just somebody who has volunteered to appear ill. So I'm going to go through some of the things that we learn about on coronavirus.gov. Remember, that's the site that I recommend for coronavirus information, and we're going to go through some of the things that they say and some of my own views about how we should conduct self-isolation. So let's take a look and see how we should do this. So the first thing that happens, of course, is the arrival. It's important to know that the driver of the vehicle should wear a mask, and it's the N95 mask. We're going to talk about that a little later. The passenger, the affected person, can just wear a simple surgical mask. These should be provided to you at the place where the diagnosis or the sample was made. Many of these people who go into self-isolation are going into self-isolation without knowing particularly the diagnosis yet. Maybe they've been swabbed in their car or at a test center, and they're asked to go home into self-isolation until results of the test come back or until we decide to stop isolation. Again, we'll talk about when to stop self-isolation at the very end of the program. So when somebody comes out of the car, it's important that everybody not rush to greet them. How did it go with the doctor? What happened? What did they tell you? Stay away. If this person has been instructed to be in self-isolation, it's time to be in self-isolation. Open the door for them, because it's important that the person not be touching everything around them until they get to their area of isolation. Avoid contact with pets, because pets can receive the virus, not be ill, and then wind up spreading it to other people in the home. In the area where the person is being self-isolated, and this is usually going to be a bedroom, we see that it's important that even though that is an area that is only accessible to the person in isolation, we don't want kids and everybody else going in there, that they wipe down the areas that they're going to touch frequently. Light switches and surfaces need to be wiped down. Toys and extraneous things that don't belong in the room should be removed so that kids or other people don't decide to go in the room because they forgot something or they need something. And then the bathroom is of particular importance. The person should have access to one bathroom that is not used by other people. They should have a dedicated towel. Even though it's their bathroom, it's a good idea to wipe down surfaces frequently, at least 2 or 3 times a day, using proper disinfectant wipes or sprays. We went through the proper way of diluting chlorine on the previous video. If you don't have access to disinfectant sprays, it's important that you make your own. And if you want a list of approved disinfectant sprays, again, coronavirus.gov, it's there. You have to shift through some of the pages, but the first thing you do is you click on the section that says if you think that you are sick or ill. I forget exactly what it says. It's at the very top of the menus. So you go through that. It's important to know that it is very difficult to be isolated for long periods of time. Some people we will ask to be isolated for 2 or 3 weeks. And so that can be very boring. The TV set, the connected generation, the cell phone, all those things help. But listen, speaking of the connected generation, it's very important for you to know that real friends count, because this is the time when friends and family need to be there to bring you food, to keep you company, to be calling you, and sometimes you're just not going to get that. on social media, it's not the same. And then you may be able to go outside if you have access to a yard or a place where you can keep some distance between you and other people. Outside you don't have to wear your mask, but if you're going to be around people, it's still a good idea to wear the mask. Remember, 6 feet away is the way to go. The other thing is that if you're alone in a yard or in a wide open space, not in a public space where there are other people, but in an open space that maybe is more private, it's okay. Grab a chair, read a book, look at the birds. You're going to go crazy if you just stay cocooned inside. So these are the basic features of isolation, and mental health during this part is going to be very important. Most people are going to recover. Their physical health will be good. Eventually, 99% of people, unless they have significant risk factors, are going to recover well. But the scars in the mind take a little longer to heal. So welcome back. We're not in the bunker anymore. We're in a nice and pleasant environment. This is my son who stood in for us as a prop. He was the sick patient that you saw in the video. He really wasn't a sick patient. It's all just make-believe because we're trying to make a point. You saw him wearing this type of a mask. This is an N95 mask. By the way, it says right here it's made in China. So there you go. Go figure. So it's an N95 mask. This is the type of mask that patients don't necessarily need to be wearing. They can wear cheaper, disposable, and more easily to get surgical masks. These are masks that you generally tie behind your head, behind your neck. Sometimes they have these little loops just like this one that you can loop in. But those masks are made so that people who are wearing them, as we explained in our last video, do not breathe out bacteria and germs. That's good if you have a patient who's affected with coronavirus, so that they don't breathe out the virus. These are different. These are meant to protect the wearer from getting the virus, and they're more expensive and more difficult to get. So if you have somebody who is sick, as I showed in my previous video, we're just going to give them surgical masks. I want to ask you, I think in the last clip we did of you, you were kind of like looking out the window, expressing some sense of frustration or unhappiness. Why were you looking out the window? How would you feel if you were really in isolation and the days go by and you're stuck in a room? It may be a gilded cage, but it's still a cage.
Right. Isolation is very boring and can really require you to find new ways to pass time as you're sitting there just waiting.
Right. So you might have a cell phone, you might have a television set. I kind of pointed toward the wall because there's no TV in that room. That we would put in a TV for you and all that sort of thing. Of course, this is all make-believe. It's not real. But it's real for a lot of people, and it's going to become more real as we go along. What would you do to pass the time? How would you feel if it were day 3 and a lot of people are stuck in that room for a couple of weeks? I mean, how would you feel if you were stuck in a room like that, not feeling the touch of other people, maybe taking your meals alone? I mean, how would that feel?
No doubt very lonely and very frustrating to be stuck there. Lots of cabin fever, lots of wanting to get out of the room or out of the house, especially now that restaurants are closed and everything, all the entertainment venues are closed. Even if you're not affected by coronavirus directly, you're probably having cabin fever already because there's nothing to do outside the house. So I'm already starting to feel it a little bit myself.
Right. So isolation is a way of torture. We use that sometimes in the military to get prisoners to talk and say things. So isolation is no fun. And at some point, I think that people who are going to be in isolation are going to find it very difficult to remain in isolation and maintain their sanity. So folks, listen, this calls for a measure of extra grace with other people. And there's another concept of who's taking care of the caretaker. So there are people who would bring the patient food, who would bring the patient literature, and sometimes when people start losing their nerve because they've been in isolation for a while, who do they lash out at? They lash out at the closest human beings, which in this case may be the human beings that are taking care of them. So as we close this segment, I just want to remind our viewers one more time that we're all going to get through this. If you're a person of faith, as I am, I'm reminded of Philippians 4:6, where it says that we shouldn't be anxious about anything. Anything is a lot of things. Anything, but in everything, even in hard times, even in bad times, to thank God for the blessings that we do have. Folks, have strength. We're all going to get over this. We're all going to go and have our normal lives again. But right now we just have to hunker down and do what has to be done. Again, extra measure of grace for those people who are going to be in isolation. It's a growing group. There's going to be more of them. Now, when is it that we should stop isolation? Well, I go to my favorite source of all things coronavirus, and that is, as we've previously mentioned, coronavirus.gov. And there you can have a wealth of information that is good and accurate. I'm going to read from their publication on web, coronavirus.gov, when to stop isolation. There's two ways of doing this. First, if you're going to do a test to see if you no longer have the virus, we're going to follow a certain set of guidelines about when to stop isolation. It's sooner than you think. We'll read from the text in a moment. And if you are going to have a test to see if you no longer have coronavirus or are shedding coronavirus, then we're going to find a different set of guidelines. So here they are. If you're not going to have a test, here are the guidelines. If you've had no fever for at least 72 hours, that means 3 days, right? Without fever, and you're not using medicine to drop your fever, right? Because then we have a fictitious drop of fever. So if you've had no fever in 72 hours and other symptoms like cough or shortness of breath have improved, they don't necessarily have to resolve completely. They just have to improve. And that's very subjective. Only you and the people who are taking care of you can really tell. And at least 7 days have passed since you first developed symptoms. Not since you were diagnosed, but since you first developed symptoms. That's one group. Now, if you're going to get tested to see if the coronavirus has left, then the criteria is a little different. It's not that different, but here it is. You no longer have a fever, again, without medicine to reduce the fever, and other symptoms have improved. And you have 2 negative tests in a row for coronavirus that are done 24 hours apart. This is from coronavirus.gov, really the trustworthy source for coronavirus information. So a lot of people are getting isolation, self-isolation. Again, if you have mild or moderate symptoms, that's what's going to happen. If you've got severe symptoms, you're going to wind up in the hospital. But those are the current guidelines for when to stop isolation for those folks who are at home. So remember, if you like this video, give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends and family. You can also find us on Facebook, and we have postings on Instagram that have more to do with lifestyle. Leave a comment if you have questions, if you have things you want us to answer, let us know. And we're going to do our very best to answer them. Remember, your local doctor is a great source of information, and coronavirus.gov. And if you fill out the comment section, which we hope you do, tell us what you're doing to kill time. If you're a person in isolation, listen, we want to hear from you. I'd love to know what you're going through. So we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.